a 70-year-old black mechanic with $50 in his cash box and a bank notice due Tuesday. 5 soaked bikers. 7 doors already said no. He opened the 8th. What happened next? Changed everything on Highway 7. Hit follow so you don't miss how this ends. Every morning for 45 years, Ezra Calloway opened the garage at 5 a.m. He didn't need an alarm. His body knew. He'd pull on his work coat in the dark, touch the corner of his father's photograph above the old workbench, Solomon Calloway, 1952. Standing in front of a cinder block building with a hand-painted sign and a grin that said he'd earned every inch of it, and whisper, "Morning, Daddy." Then he'd walk next door to kiss his wife. Ruth was always already there. Coffee on, apron tied, biscuits in the oven. The smell of bacon drifting out into the gray Ohio morning like it had every single day since 1979. Morning, sugar! Morning, baby! They didn't need to look at each other anymore. 45 years had made looking unnecessary. Hey, Calloway's little fix! It's at Highway 7, 4 miles outside Harlan, Ohio. 2 old buildings and a small house tucked behind them. The garage on the left, built by Solomon Calloway in 1952, with borrowed money in both hands, back when a black man opening a business on a state highway in rural Ohio was either an act of faith or an act of stubbornness, and Solomon had always been both. Ruth's table on the right, added in 1982 when Ruth quit the diner in town to be near her husband. A narrow breezeway connected them. They ate lunch there together every day at noon. 2 mugs, 2 plates, 45 years. It was a life. Small, honest, and held together by habit and love in equal measure. What Ezra hadn't told Ruth, what he'd been turning face down on his desk for 3 months, was the bank notice. The deadline was Tuesday. He'd counted the cash box that morning. $50, 2 20s, a 5 singles. These hands had rebuilt thousands of engines. These hands had buried his father, his mother, and his only son. Maya had come to them 3 years after, his son's daughter, born to a woman who couldn't stay, left on their porch in a car seat with a note and a name. They had never called it anything other than theirs. Now these hands were going to hand over the keys. He didn't say it out loud, neither did Ruth. But Solomon's photograph watched from above the workbench, and the coffee was hot, and Tuesday was coming whether they said it or not. What Ezra also hadn't told Ruth, what sat heavier than the bank notice, was the other letter, the one from Solomon's history that lived in Ezra's chest like a stone. In 1968, Solomon Calloway had walked into Harlan Savings with a perfect credit file and 16 years of business records, asking to expand the garage. The loan officer had looked at him, looked at the file, and said, "We don't have anything for you right now." Solomon had driven home, sat in the garage until midnight, and never applied for a loan again. Ezra told that story to Maya every year on Solomon's birthday. Maya knew every word. She was 18 now, and last week, she had run down Highway 7 holding a letter from MIT like it was a living thing. $45,000 a year. Ezra had cried right there in the bay, grease still on his hands. The cash box held $50, and Tuesday was 4 days away. The MIT letter was taped to the refrigerator. Maya had put it there herself, carefully, like hanging a painting in a museum. Every morning when Ezra opened the kitchen door to kiss Ruth, he saw it, and every morning the same 2 things happened inside him at exactly the same moment, a pride so fierce it made his throat close, and a dread so quiet it never showed on his face. Ruth had made it clear the first night. "She won't hear it from me, Ezra. Not yet. Let her sign whatever she needs to sign. Let her fight for it first." So they smiled. They asked Maya about her classes, about her friends, about the essay she was writing for her MIT orientation file. That was the part neither of them had expected. Maya wasn't just going to MIT to study engineering. She was writing her entry essay about Solomon Calloway, about a self-taught black mechanic in rural Ohio who built a garage from a cinder block shell in 1952, who fixed cars for families who couldn't always pay, who was turned away from a bank in 1968 with 16 years of perfect records and never broke stride. Maya had interviewed Ezra for 3 hours one Sunday afternoon in the Bay, a notebook in her lap, asking questions Ezra hadn't been asked in 40 years. Why didn't he apply again? Ezra had been quiet a long time. "Because some doors," he said finally, "you only knock on once. After that, you build your own." Maya had written that down slowly, like she was pressing it into the page. Ezra had watched her write it and felt something shift in his chest, The stone that had lived there since 1968 moving just slightly. What he didn't know was that Maya had also, quietly, without telling anyone, applied for a part-time research assistant position at MIT's engineering lab. She'd gotten it. She was going to help pay her own way. Ruth found the confirmation email on Maya's laptop one afternoon when Maya left it open on the kitchen table. Ruth read it, closed the laptop, and walked into the pantry and stood very still for a moment over the dish sink. Then she went back to the griddle. She didn't tell Ezra. She didn't tell Maya she'd seen it. She just looked at that girl every morning over breakfast and felt something so large and so specific that it didn't have a name, the feeling of watching someone you raised become someone you admire. The rain started Saturday at noon. Not the kind that comes hard for 20 minutes and quits. The other kind. The kind that fills the low spots on Highway 7 by 2 o'clock and doesn't ask permission. By 3, the tornado watch was running on the radio every 15 minutes. By 4, Ruth had pulled in her open sign. By 5, Ezra was standing in the bay door watching the rain come sideways across the lot. A transmission half apart on the bench behind him, the customer not coming today, and probably not Monday either. He was about to flip his sign when he heard them. Not engines. Something heavier. The click and drag of dead chains. 5 motorcycles pushed, not ridden, still half a mile down the road. Just shapes in the gray sheet of rain. A mile back, the road had dipped into a hollow where a creek ran under a low bridge. By noon, that hollow was a lake. Curtis Mercer, road name Stone, had eased his Harley in at 3 miles an hour, sure he could walk it across. He didn't make it. Water hit his air intake halfway through. The 4 behind him stalled out one by one like a string of dominoes going quiet. They spent an hour pulling the bikes out of the flood. Then they started knocking on doors. The first house, curtain pulled back, face gone. The second, an old man in the doorway. Something leaning against the wall behind him. You boys keep moving. The third, no answer. A face in the upstairs window that disappeared. The fourth, a garage, lights on, a mechanic visible through the glass, who walked to the front door and turned the closed sign around without opening it. The fifth, a gas station, where the kid behind the counter said everything was broken until a pickup pulled up, and he hopped out to help without hesitation. The sixth door was the one that landed differently. It belonged to a man named Marcus Webb. 35 years old, black, ran a small shop 2 miles up the highway. The kind of man who'd had doors closed on him, who'd been looked at sideways in parts stores and talked over at trade counters and followed through dealership showrooms by salesmen who smiled too carefully. Marcus saw the 5 men through his shop window. Big, soaked, white, tattooed, and something old and animal moved through him before he could stop it. He reached over and turned the lock, clicked off the light, stood in the dark of his own shop and listened to the knocking until it stopped. The 7th was a deputy sheriff who ran their IDs, found nothing, handed them back without a word, and drove away. He didn't offer a phone. He didn't offer a radio call. He just left them standing in the rain with clean records and nowhere to go. So they pushed. They pushed those bikes 2 more miles in the rain, soaked through, Stone coughing hard now, going gray, one hand on the handlebars and the other pressed to his chest, until they came around a long bend and saw, through the rain, a yellow light in a window. Calloway's Fix. Ruth's Table. Established 1952. Stone looked at his 4 brothers. Last try, he rasped. If they say no, I'm done. Ezra saw them coming up the driveway and didn't move. 5 men, soaked leather vests black with rain, walking dead bikes, one slow step at a time. The one in front was leaning on his handlebars like a man using his last reserve. Ezra stood in the bay door and took them in. The patches, the beards, the tattoos crawling up the necks of 2 of them, the sheer physical weight of them in the gray evening light. He heard, in his own head, every voice the town had ever produced on the subject of men who looked like that. He thought about the bank notice. He thought about what the 3 regulars he had left might say. He thought about the transmission on the bench that wasn't going to pay itself off. His hand moved to the edge of the bay door. He pulled it halfway closed. He stood in the half-dark and listened to the rain and the sound of a man coughing outside who could not stop. And then something else moved through him. Not instinct exactly, memory. Solomon's voice, specific and low, the way it got when he was telling the truth. Ezra, the year I was building this place, a family broke down out front in a thunderstorm. White family. Wouldn't have looked twice at me on the street. I fixed their car for free and they cried like I'd handed them something they'd never been given before. That's the one I think about. Not the bank. Not the loan officer. That one. Ezra let go of the door. He pulled his coat off the hook and walked out into the rain. The 5 men stopped at the edge of the lot like they were afraid to come closer until they were invited. Before Ezra could speak, the door behind him opened. Ruth stepped out onto the breezeway in her apron, dish towel in hand, and looked at the men the way she looked at everything, straight, unhurried, complete. Then she looked at her husband. "Bring them in, Ezra." He opened his mouth. "Hattie, I see what they are." She turned and went back inside. That was that. Ezra raised his voice toward the men. "Park them under the overhang. Out of the wet. Then come inside." The big one, Stone, tried to say thank you and started coughing instead. Ezra was already moving. He got Stone's arm over shoulder and walked him toward the pantry door. "What's your name?" "Stone." "Curtis." "Okay, Curtis, you got medication on you? Heart medication, anything like that?" Stone blinked at him through the rain. "How'd you?" "My wife's brother had the same cough for 2 years before they told him what it was." "What kind?" "Beta blocker. Saddlebag." Ezra looked over his shoulder at the one with the medic patch on his vest. "Son, get his pills now." "Yes, sir. Already moving." Inside Ruth's table. Ruth had already lit the wood stove in the back room and was pulling quilts off the shelf before the door opened. She didn't glance at the size of them. She walked straight to Stone, put one small hand against his cheek, and said, "Oh, baby, you're freezing. Sit down before you fall down." Stone, 6'2", 270 pounds, a tattoo of his daughter's name across his collarbone, sat down like a child told to. She had his vest off in 30 seconds, folded it carefully across the back of the chair, the way you'd fold a uniform, got the pill into him with sips of warm water, 2 fingers to his neck to check his pulse. "Ezra, he's running hot. Fever starting." "I see it." At the counter, the other 4 were dripping on her floor. Rex, road name Hammer, the medic, was already back from the saddlebag, pill in hand. Tank, 6'4", neck tattoo, sat at the counter when Ruth pointed at the stool without looking at him, the way you point at a dog's bed. She slammed 3 plates down. Fried chicken, biscuits, sweet tea, poured from a sweating glass pitcher. Tank bit into a biscuit and his jaw started to wobble. He put it down, covered his face with an enormous hand. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I haven't." "Eat your biscuit, son. Made it this morning." He ate it, tears running into his beard the whole time. Nobody said anything. Reaper, the quiet one, had been watching Ruth work. Finally, voice low. 7 doors said no today. "Ma'am, one of them called the cops." Ruth didn't look up from the soup pot. Folks see what they want to see. "You didn't ask if we were dangerous." She looked up then. "You're cold and you're hungry. That's all I needed to know." Then, somewhere in the quiet of the back room, Stone's voice came through the curtain. Weak, deliberate part. The voice of a man choosing his words carefully. "Ma'am." Ruth appeared at the curtain. "Why'd you open the door?" Ruth stood still for a moment. She dried her hands on her apron. "My father-in-law built this place so nobody on this road would ever have to stand outside a closed door." She said it the way you'd say something you'd known for a long time but never been asked to put into words. "That's why." Stone closed his eyes. He nodded once, slowly, like something had been confirmed that he'd needed to have confirmed. The ambulance came at 10:15. The paramedic said quietly to Ruth, "Those pills and the warmth, ma'am. Another 20 minutes and it could have gone the other way." Stone held Ruth's hand at the doorway. "Your name." "Full name. I need to remember it." "Ruth Calloway." "That's my husband, Ezra." He said it 3 times under his breath as they wheeled him out. Like a prayer, Hammer pressed a playing card under the coffee tin before they left. Iron Ravens MC. A phone number. Sunday came up gray and cold, but the rain had stopped. Ezra was out front by 6, surveying the damage the storm had done, a gutter hanging by 2 nails, shingles off the pantry roof, the front sign tilted another inch toward the road. He stood there, in his work coat with a coffee mug, and looked at all of it, and didn't feel what he expected to feel. He kept thinking about Stone's face when he'd said his daughter's name, Ella. "She's 8. The pantry opened at 6:30 like every other Sunday. A trucker named Earl leaned on the counter and said, "Hattie, my buddy drove past here last night. Said he saw bikers at your place. Big fellows. You all right?" Ruth wiped a coffee ring. "One of them was sick." "Sick how?" "Sick enough. Ruth, you ought to be careful about. You want another biscuit? Earl? He raised both hands. Yes, ma'am. Monday morning, there was a box on the porch. Plain cardboard, no label, no tape, oil filters, brake cleaner, shop rags, electrical tape, $50 worth of supplies. No card, but a patch tucked under the flap, a small Iron Ravens MC rocker, the kind worn on the bottom of a vest. Hammer had driven back Sunday evening. Ruth hadn't heard the truck. Ruth carried it inside and put it on the counter and stood looking at it for a long time. Then she went and got Ezra. Somebody left this on the porch. Who'd leave this? I don't know, baby. He went back to the garage. She didn't put the box away. She left it on the counter where she could see it and looked at it 3 more times before lunch. Monday evening, 2 men she'd never seen came in, ordered sandwiches, asked how long the pantry had been there, and left a $50 tip on a $12 order. Tuesday morning, the morning the bank notice came due, Ezra stopped in front of the corkboard at Russ's gas station. The Iron Ravens MC flyer had been there for years, faded at the corners. This time he read the small print. Annual toy run for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. $220,000 donated since 1997. He stood there a long time. Russ came over with the milk. Been there forever. Probably some kind of scam. Ezra didn't answer. He walked out. Tuesday night, 11:46 p.m., a text from Hammer landed on Ruth's phone. Mrs. C, open at 6 tomorrow morning, please. Got some brothers coming through. Don't be scared. They look worse than they are. Ruth walked into the bedroom and showed it to Ezra. He read it twice. How many brothers? She looked through the open door at the box of supplies still sitting on the counter. Then she looked at her husband. Ezra, we're going to need a bigger pot of coffee. At 5:58 Wednesday morning, Ruth brewed 3 pots instead of 1. Ezra was outside, dragging the trash can to the side of the lot, glancing toward the highway every 2 minutes, though he wouldn't have said he was nervous. He had the bank notice folded in his back pocket. The sky was the color of an old nickel. The mist sat low on Highway 7. Then he heard it, a low rumble, far off, coming from the south, then more of it, then more on top of that. Then the sound stopped being engines and started being something else, a wall, a weather system, moving up the road. Ezra set down the trash can. Ruth stepped out of the pantry doorway and walked to the edge of the breezeway, dish towel still in her hands. The mist broke. 70 Harleys, 2x2, in tight formation, like a parade nobody had told the town about. Behind them, 3 pickups stacked with lumber and shingles, 2 contractor vans, a food truck, a man with a camera in a leather vest. They pulled into the lot in formation. Engines idled. Then, on a hand signal nobody saw given, every engine cut at once. Silence dropped on the property like a blanket. The lead rider swung off his bike. Bald, silver beard to his sternum, dark glasses on, though the sun wasn't up. He walked across the gravel, one heavy step at a time, and stopped in front of Ezra and stuck out a hand the size of a Bible. Mom tattooed across the knuckles. You Ezra Calloway? Yes, sir. Victor Sutton, road name Bones, VP, Iron Ravens MC Columbus chapter. You the man who pulled Stone out of that storm? I, yes, sir. Then shake my hand before I embarrass myself in front of 70 grown men. Ezra shook it. 3 seconds longer than a handshake. Before Ezra could say anything else, Bones reached into his vest and pulled out a plain white envelope. He held it out without a word. Ezra opened it, a cashier's check. The amount was exactly what the bank notice said. Not a dollar more. Stone made some calls, Bones said. Don't make it into something it isn't. He was already walking away before Ezra could answer. Then Stone stepped out of the lead pickup, leg in a walking cast, grinning like a kid on his birthday, and made his way across the gravel on a crutch. He stopped 2 feet from Ruth and bent his head. My daughter's name is Ella. She just turned 8. Saturday night, I was supposed to leave her without a daddy. You gave her daddy back. He started to cry, right there, in front of 70 men. Ruth pulled him into her shoulder and held on. He sobbed once, hard, the kind that comes out of a man who hasn't cried since his mother died. Then, midway through the morning, the demolition crew hit something inside the garage wall. A foreman called Ezra over. They'd pulled back a section of old drywall and found, nailed into the framing behind it, a painted wooden sign. Hand-lettered, black on white, the paint cracked and brown at the edges. Calloway's Fix, S. 1952. Bones came to stand beside Ezra. Neither of them spoke for a long time. That your daddy's? Ezra nodded. He couldn't find anything to say. He told Bones about the photograph. About Solomon standing in front of this same wall in 1952. About the spot where the picture had hung since the day Ezra took over the garage. He didn't mean to say all of it. It came out anyway. Ruth appeared behind him and placed her hand flat on his back between his shoulder blades and left it there. Bones turned to the crew. "Nobody touches that sign until I say so. Everybody understand me?" 40 heads nodded. The sign was photographed, carefully removed, handed to a restorer in the group who did antique work on the side. When the new wall went back up 3 weeks later, the sign was rehung, not outside, but inside, directly above Solomon's photograph on the workbench wall, in the exact spot where Ezra would see it every morning when he touched the frame and said good morning to his father. Bones had given the order without being asked. Solomon's wall stays Solomon's wall. The work didn't stop for 10 weeks. That first Wednesday alone, 70 men ripped out rotted siding, hauled a dumpster of broken shingles, and poured a fresh concrete pad before sundown. By the second weekend, the garage was stripped to the studs and being rebuilt from the inside out. A hydraulic lift went in, donated by a member who ran a parts warehouse 2 counties over. New compressor, new lighting, new benches. Every one of Solomon's old tools, every wrench, every spanner, every worn handle, was removed, photographed, and rehung in exactly the same position. Ruth's table was rebuilt booth by booth, 6 new seats, a proper coffee station, a griddle large enough to feed a small army. The breezeway got a covered roof and outdoor seating. And in the third week, without anyone telling him, a crew of 3 showed up one morning and built 2 raised garden beds along the south wall of the breezeway, planted 2 rose bushes, set a small wooden bench between them. Ruth stood in the doorway, looking at it for a full minute before she went back to the griddle. She'd mentioned wanting a garden once, years ago, in passing, to no one in particular. They had listened. The house behind the pantry was done in 2 days, roof stripped and relaid, pipes replaced, windows resealed. The buckets that had lived on the bedroom floor through 6 Ohio winters were carried out to the curb. Ruth was the one who saw them sitting there by the trash bin. She stood on the porch looking at them and cried quietly with her hands folded in front of her, the way a person cries when something they'd stopped believing would be fixed gets fixed. Ezra found her there and didn't say anything. He just stood beside her. 3 weeks in, Bones came up the breezeway while Ezra was eating lunch and dropped a manila envelope on the table. "One more thing. Brothers voted." Ezra opened it. Iron Raven's MC Trade and Engineering Fund. Recipient, Maya Calloway. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, College of Engineering. 4 years. Tuition, books, plus housing stipend. $100,000. Ezra put his sandwich down. He stared at the paper. He didn't bother trying to stop the tears. They were already there, running down into his coffee, without any drama, the way water goes where it goes. "Bones, sign the paper, Ezra. I can't just sign the paper." "One condition." Bones closed his eyes briefly. "Of course there is. Make it permanent. Every year, 1 scholarship. Doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter what they're studying. 1 rule, the person who gets it has to do 1 free job every year for somebody who can't pay. Forever." Bones looked at him for a long moment. He pulled a pen from his vest pocket, clicked it, and set it on the table between them. "You're a pain in the ass, you know that?" "Yes, sir." "Done. I'll get the board in line by Monday." He pushed the pen toward Ezra. Ezra signed. Bones clapped him on the back hard enough to make him cough, then walked back toward the work without another word. That evening, Ezra called Maya. He didn't explain anything. He just said, "Emotional people, come home this weekend if you can." When she walked in Saturday morning and found both of them sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope between them, she looked at their faces, sat down slowly, and read the letter without speaking. When she finished, she looked up. Ezra said, "Solomon built the door. You're what goes through it." Maya pressed her lips together. Then she reached across the table and took both of their hands, one in each of hers, and held on. The reopening was a Sunday 10 weeks after the storm. The whole town came, people Ezra hadn't seen in years, people who'd been driving past Calloway's Fix for decades without stopping. The mayor gave a speech under the new breezeway awning. 70 Iron Ravens stood in full formation, bikes lined up along the lot like a military procession, chrome catching the October sun. Maya cut the ribbon. Ruth cried behind her sunglasses and pretended she wasn't. Ezra shook hands until he couldn't feel his arm. At the end of the afternoon, when the crowd had thinned and the food truck was packing up, Stone made his way across the lot on his crutch and handed Ruth a small frame. Inside it, a pencil drawing, careful and earnest in the way of a child who is trying very hard. A man with a beard, a woman in an apron, a house with a heart drawn on the roof. At the bottom, in the uneven printing of an 8-year-old, "Thank you for saving my daddy. Love, Ella." Ruth hung it behind the counter before the day was over, between the coffee station and Solomon's old work schedule, which had been framed and hung there since 1987. It has not moved since. Late in the afternoon, when most of the bikes had rolled out and the lot was quiet, Ezra noticed a figure standing at the far edge of the gravel. Not in a vest, not on a motorcycle. A man in street clothes, holding a white bakery box, standing at the border of the lot like someone who'd gotten as far as he could get and wasn't sure about the rest. Marcus Webb, 35 years old. His shop 2 miles up the highway. Ezra watched him from across the lot for a moment. Then he walked over. The two men stood in front of each other, and neither of them spoke for what felt like a long time. The bakery box was between them like an object placed on a table to have something to look at. Then Ezra said, "You got a broken car, or are you here for coffee?" Marcus met his eyes. "Coffee, if that's all right." Ezra nodded once, turned back toward Ruth's table. "Coffee's on me." They walked through the door together, side by side, without another word. Ruth looked up from behind the counter, took in the two of them, and said nothing. She reached for the pot and poured 2 cups. The story didn't stay local. By the Tuesday after reopening, a Columbus paper ran a front-page photo of Ruth holding Stone in the breezeway. The headline read, "7 doors said no. The 8th said yes." By Friday, it was on the wire. By the following week, a video clip of Bones' speech in the lot had 8 million views. The Iron Ravens MC social account, which Ezra had never heard of, climbed from 80,000 followers to 400,000 in a month. People left comments in every language. A woman in Glasgow wrote that she was crying on a bus. Saturdays on Highway 7 stopped looking like Saturdays on Highway 7. People came from 4 states, bikers, couples, truckers rerouting hauls just to stop for an hour. Ezra hired his first apprentice in 20 years, a young man named Devin Park who'd seen the news, driven 2 counties over, knocked on the bay door, and said, "Mr. Calloway, I'd like to learn from you." Hired before lunch, Ruth hired 2 single mothers from the trailer park down the road, paid above minimum, sent them home every night with whatever was left in the warming tray. Russ at the gas station quietly put a donation jar on his counter next to the Iron Ravens toy run flyer. One afternoon, an old man drove down from Akron just to sit at the counter and drink a cup of coffee. He said his father had broken down on Highway 7 in 1965, and a mechanic named Solomon had fixed the car for free and refused to take anything. "I never forgot that name," he said. He left $20 under his cup and didn't say goodbye. The hardware store reopened. The first official Iron Raven scholarship went to a 20-year-old single mother studying diesel mechanics. The second went to an 18-year-old who wanted to be a chef. Ezra handed them their certificates at Ruth's table. Ruth sent them home with peach pies and 1 sentence each. "Now go, baby, and don't forget the rule." One year, to the day after the storm, on a foggy October morning, a rusted sedan limped into the lot at 5:30 a.m. Steam off the hood. A young woman got out, thrift store blazer, cheap flats, eyes that had been crying recently. "Sir, I don't have any money. I have a job interview in Columbus in 2 hours. It's a real one, the first real one. Is there any way?" Ezra held up a hand. "Pop the hood, sweetheart." Ruth appeared in the breezeway. One look. "Honey, when's the last time you ate?" The woman couldn't answer. "Come sit at the counter. Biscuits are up. Coffee's on." 40 minutes later, the car was running. Tightened hose, a belt from the scrap pile, fluids topped. The woman tried to leave her phone as collateral. Ezra pressed something into her palm instead. A business card, the new Callaway's Fix logo on one side, and on the other, in his own handwriting, "You don't owe us. Pass it on someday." She drove off into the fog. They watched the taillights disappear. Then she looked down at the card in her hand. She turned it over. "Read the front. Callaway's Fix, Est, 1952, Solomon Calloway, founder." She stopped. She reversed slowly back up the drive. She got out. She looked at Ezra. "Solomon Calloway. My grandfather used to talk about him. Said he was the only mechanic in this county who ever treated him right." 1965. Ezra stood very still. Ruth stood very still. Out on Highway 7, faint through the fog, came the sound of Harleys. Saturday riders heading south. Ezra looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Ezra. She reached over and touched the back of his hand with 2 fingers, the way she had for 45 years when there was nothing left to say and everything had already been said. The circle that Solomon Calloway had started in 1952 with borrowed money, both hands, and a sign painted on a cinder block wall had just closed. Right here, 70 years later. If this story moved you, drop a heart in the comments and tell me where in the world you're reading this right now. And be honest with me, would you have opened that door?